Welcome to Cocktails and Capital, the working on your business podcast that feels more like grabbing a drink with your best friend. I'm your host, Sarah Tatum, that best friend. I'm the owner of Tatum Accounting, where we invite our clients to take a vacation from their bookkeeping. In this podcast, I'm going to give it to you straight. Talking points and bake tips, we don't do that here. There's a bunch of noise out there in the entrepreneur community, especially when it relates to finances. And when you're trying to run your business, you just don't have time for that. And I know that you would rather be doing literally anything other than recording expenses and logging into your accounting software. So I'm bringing you practical advice without any of the fluff, just like your best friend would. So turn the volume up, grab your gin and tonic, and let's dive into this week's theme. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cocktails and Capital, episode 44. Today, we have another guest episode with the wonderful Wendy from Baked Deliveries. Is it Baked Deliveries? Is it beef? What, how do I
It
pronounce
is. It is. It's Bake. I always introduce
Okay.
myself as Bake, spelled B4K3, and I tend more now to go by Bake Baking Service because
Yeah.
fancy.
Yeah. No, that's good. I've looked at it for, oh my gosh, I think I followed you for like a year and a half now. And I've looked at it this whole time. And I think one time I was talking to a friend and I was like, yeah, the B4KE. He was like, do you mean bake? I was like, no, it's literally. She's like, no, don't do that.
Seriously, I have a script at markets that it's like it's just Bake. It's just
It's
Bake.
just
They're like staring at the logo, like really trying to make something of it. I'm like, it's just Bake.
clever though. I like it. I like it a lot.
Computer
That's
nerds.
so That's so funny. But you are obviously baker, and I would say you're kind of locally famous in the area for
Not quite internationally famous yet.
no, unfortunately, but we'll get there. But you have some really great bread, sourdough, biscuits, scones, brownies. I mean, you kind of doing all of the baking realm, everything but cookies, I'd say.
Oh, I do
And
cookies too. I
you
just
do?
Yeah, I can't do everything all the time as much as I
No,
try.
we cannot do everything all at once, which is exactly why we're doing this podcast today, because we're going to talk about balance today. If you followed me on Instagram for a while, there's a lot of content out there about balancing your work with your personal life and making sure that we take our rest and our responsibilities are handled business wise, but we are still taking care of ourselves and we're eliminating as much stress as we can from our business and our, regular life. And Wendy here still has a full-time job and is doing this big side hustle at the same time. And we want to make it quite clear that she will continue to be doing her full-time job.
Yeah,
We are not looking at leaving.
that's the plan anyway. Like it's
Yeah.
and people ask why do you do this? And I'm like, why not? Why not?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good way to look at that. I was going to ask, why did you start doing this? I know that I looked on your Instagram, or was it your website? Your sourdough is like decades old. Like it's like older than me, I think.
Well, not quite that old, but no, my starter's I wish it was. My starter is about 8 years old at this point, I think. But yeah, I started doing it like so many bakers. I'm sure people have heard this story however many times, but during the pandemic, everyone's locked inside and sad and like their kids are driving them nuts and they were like, "Can you please drop off some brownies or some cookies or something to keep us entertained because I'm gonna go crazy?" And I said, "Sure, yeah, I'll come by on Wednesday to Virginia Beach and I'll just go around to people's houses and drop things off." And then after a couple months of that, it was like, "Oh, hey, I left you some money on the under the doormat." And I was like, "All right,
Okay.
that's a thing." And it just kind of spiraled out of control from there, depending on how you look at it. And yeah, it just got to the point where I was getting requests like, "Can you come to Chesapeake on Saturday? Can you come here on Sunday?" And I was like driving all over the place trying to like get to all these places and get to all these people, and it
Yeah.
just kept going.
Yeah, that's pretty much I think how most businesses start. Every interview that I've had on this podcast has been a COVID business, which is a little bit crazy to think about, but I feel like there was such an influx. I mean, we know this, off statistics, there was such an influx in COVID started businesses. And I think the creativity came out just a little bit when COVID happened and we did get bored and we needed to do more with our time that wasn't available, you know, beforehand. So when we talk about that creativity, did you start with like all these recipes that you kind of had in the back pocket and then like all of your friends just knew that you were really good at baking and then asked you for treat delivery or
It was
that
kind of a mix. I definitely had some things that I was bringing to parties or bringing to
mm,
baby showers, or like I had done like a couple of like small weddings and stuff where people like, "Oh, can you make those cookies that you made for my birthday 2 years ago?" or whatever. And it was just things that I had like tried out and were like, "Oh, this is really good." And so I was kind of known for a few specific things. And then when I started expanding, like people would request like, "Oh, do you know how to make this?" And I was like, I mean, I can figure it out. Like, it's what is it? It's just science. Like, we can figure this out. And so I just
yeah.
started expanding and expanding, and then people started asking. I was already making sourdough at that point. I'd been messing
Mhm,
with it for probably about 3 years at that point, and then
mhm.
people started asking about, like, "I've never eaten sourdough before. Can you bring me some of that?" And it's like, "Okay," and then I started playing with adding things to it, adding cheddar jalapeno and kind of just playing around with expanding it, and
Yeah.
your face when I said cheddar jalapeno, you were like, "Yeah."
Cheddar jalapeno is so good. If you've never had it and you're local, you have to get some. It's so good. It's my favorite. It's a total sidebar. But had you been baking for a while prior to COVID, like I know the sourdough had been a few years in, but have you always baked? Like, is this a childhood hobby?
Yeah, somewhat. I can remember when I was a kid, my dad always made our birthday cakes. Like it was his little domestic thing, I guess. And sometimes he would bake throughout the year too. But I can remember like standing there, like watching him with the piping tips and like doing all the things you're supposed to be doing and like watching him. So from a young age, I was kind of like fascinated by some of the science and technicality behind it. But nobody in my family really baked bread. And I think at some point, like we were having some family dinner and everybody was talking about bread, and I was like, "Oh, I'll just make it." And they're like, "You've never made bread before?" Again, I can figure it out. We'll try this.
Yeah,
And then the addiction was born. So I was
that's
probably,
cool.
I don't know, 23 or 24 when the first couple times I tried to make bread. So it was terrible. But
We
you
found
got to
a
start
way.
somewhere.
Yeah. And bread is a little bit intimidating. Like I do like to bake a lot. I used to do a lot of cake and like brownies. I won't eat anything that I bake because I don't have like a big sweet tooth or anything. But
That's the
I've
problem I
tried,
had.
yeah, I've tried bread and it is always like it is not good. It's not like yours at all. It's terrible. I will just buy your bread instead.
Let me do the work for you and the screaming.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, screaming. The screaming. There are some challenges in this type of industry when we're doing this kind of production, and you do a lot of farmers markets, if you wonderful listeners don't know. And your production schedule is pretty tight, right? Especially with working full time. So I know on, like a Sunday market, I think you generally do it on like the day before or Friday, and then, make sure that everything is set. Your pre-orders for the market on Sunday close today. So there is a tight schedule of like what you can do versus what you can't do. So how did all that come about? Like, did you just kind of trial and error your production schedule? Like, how do you structure that? And then in that same sense, like balance that into your full-time work as well?
Yeah, I when I went to go do my first market, I really thought I was like, I know how this is gonna work. I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do this and it's gonna be great. That was not how any of it worked. That was not correct. It was not the easiest way to do anything. So it was really a work in progress to figure out what works and like cutting things that like, am I spending too much time on this? Is this really the most efficient way of doing this? Because that's kind of how my brain works is I try to like find efficiencies and like make things as much as possible, and I rely so heavily on lists, and that's
Mhm,
how I do that, is I literally make a list for every single market, usually the Monday beforehand, if it's like a Saturday
mhm.
or Sunday market, and I just start going through the list. I know exactly what needs to be done. I pick a night where it's like, "Okay, I'm gonna get 2 or 3 of these tasks done," and then I know once Friday afternoon hits and I'm finishing work for, like, a Sunday market, I know as soon as I get home what I have to do, and I have a schedule of I know how long it takes, and I know, like, exactly what needs to be done.
Yeah, it's incredibly structured, and I mean, baking in itself is an incredibly structured process, so that makes complete and total sense. Do you find that you can be a little bit flexible in that schedule if like people like me come in late and ask for things that were or not pre-ordered on time?
It really depends on the market. So, like,
Yeah.
I've got I did an event in January that was a smaller market that was a little bit more chill, and I had someone contact me the day before, and they're like, "Oh my god, I didn't realize you were gonna be, like, 5 minutes from my house. Is there any way
Yeah.
that I can grab X from you?" And I was like, "Yeah, no problem." Like, I had enough time and space and capacity to be able to do that for them. But, when I do a super busy market that I know is going to be slammed and I've already got 20 pre-orders, or whatever, then sometimes I have to
Mhm.
kind of like, "Hey, I'm really sorry, like, I don't know if that's really good, but I can offer people an alternative," I try to work with people as much as I possibly can. So it can be flexible, but there's sourdough also, interestingly enough, is sort of it's time oriented. It takes a
Mhm.
certain amount of time, but it's also slightly unpredictable in that time. So there is
Mhm.
like wiggle room, but there's also certain times that you have to get something done by or it's simply not going to be done. So
Yeah.
I think we were joking about that last weekend when my power went
Yeah.
out and you were
Yeah.
coming to pick up something from me and I was like, yeah, just that hour, if I'd had a market it would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I remember reading that and it was just like, "Oh my god, I hope that works." This is a tragedy.
For sure, and sometimes you think you are prepared for something, and then something happens that you weren't expecting, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh god," but now you're prepared for it for the future,
Yeah.
in theory.
In theory, yeah. You can't be prepared for everything, but we can try our best.
Yes.
Uh, I know that you also do like stock for the market as well. Like I know on the Instagram today, you had posted that pre-orders were closed, but you are going to have stock. So how do you plan for the level of stock that you need in addition to the pre-orders? Like, is there a set percentage? Is it just kind of whatever you have left over dough wise? So like whatever your batch will make, or how do you kind of plan for that?
That also depends on the market size as well too,
Mhm.
like, my batching and my stock for a small market's very different than from a bigger
Yeah.
one, and that has come over time and experience of doing markets, so I kinda have a
Mhm.
mental map of, like, "Okay, this is a smaller market, this is about how much I bring to a small market," and I've kinda got, like, item slots, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
of, like, an item
Mhm.
type and about how long it takes to make, and I know
Yeah.
how many of those things I can bring to that market. And then how many loaves of sourdough I can bring to that market and how long that's going to take me. And then when I do a bigger market, it's kind of the same thing, just in a larger scale. I have more item slots, more time that needs to be taken on those items. And it's just been kind of experience like with Hunger Bash, I knew like there were certain items I wanted to bring using
Mhm.
some of their items. And then I just tailor the rest of the menu around what gaps I know are available for my time. It's a lot of time management, quite honestly. So, like, when I get through, like, a market prep and I've, like, perfectly used those timers and everything's out of the oven and I'm packaging stuff, I'm just sitting there satisfied, like,
Yeah.
"Yeah,
You're
that
so
just went exactly how it was supposed to."
Yeah, it's very process management oriented. It's honestly it's a little impressive because I would honestly just be sitting in front of the oven crying. So
I mean, I can't say that I've never done that because I definitely like I remember doing a small event when I first started the business. It may have even technically been before I officially went into business, but someone had
Mhm.
contacted me about like a neighborhood block party they wanted a bunch of stuff for, and it was my first
Mhm.
time doing like big batching. And my husband was like, "Oh, well, this is good because you're thinking about going into business
Yeah,
officially and
good
doing
practice run.
farmers markets and this will be a good practice, and it was like, I think it was 3 or 4 batches of scones that I may have had a meltdown on my floor, because I didn't know how to time anything in the oven, and, like, the bottoms burned on one set because I was trying to, like, mess with the next set and wasn't paying attention,
Oh my
and
gosh.
now I'm juggling, like, there's markets where I'm doing, I
Oh,
think I think
so
that I think it was Spooky Summer. Carrie holds the record for number of biscuits. I think I did 13 batches of biscuits, just of one
wow.
flavor. So now I'm like, it's like nothing, and I'm
Just
doing
like whatever.
15 other bakes along with it. So,
That's
yeah,
intense.
much crying,
Yeah.
definitely crying in front of the
Yeah.
oven.
We've all sat at our respective work centers and cried, but I just sounds like to me is Thanksgiving prep every day of my life, and I just don't know if I can.
I mean, it kind of is. I guess that is the best comparison that like a quote unquote layman would have is, like when you have to time 6 dishes coming out of the oven and people arriving, but the people arriving are you leaving for the market.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Think,
you because I have to pack the car and, like, do all that stuff too.
yeah, and all of your supplies and everything, and just
Yep.
make sure your head's on straight, and then the customer service aspect of a market too is pretty intense, and, making sure people are happy. I would say that we generally have, like, a rather chill market customer base in this area. Everybody seems relatively friendly and nice enough. But and I asked Carrie this, our friend from Peanut City Candle, back on her guest episode, if she had ever had any kind of like not great experiences with customers and how she handled that. And she was like, I've never had that happen to me. Um,
So that ma'am was proven to be a lie. No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. I'm not gonna call her out.
I know, right? But that does not necessarily help the listener who is thinking about going into farmers market life. So, my question for you is, have you ever had that kind of experience? Do you have any advice for anybody who may come into a rather stressful customer service experience just on the fly like that? Because farmers markets, they are go, 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 and they're on the fly, and people can get a little bit grouchy sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been very lucky, like Carrie said, and I've not really had anything really, really terrible happen. I used to work retail years ago, so I'm
Mhm.
kind of mentally prepared for that like slightly awkward, problematic customer or whatever. And I've been very lucky that I've never had anybody remotely close to what I had in retail at times.
Yeah.
But I think that specifically for my business, one thing that gets sort of argued about a lot is sourdough and like what constitutes sourdough and people put certain qualifiers on it and there's a very divisive argumentative side to some customers with like whether
Disgusting.
the last use I know this is I never thought I would fight with somebody about sourdough, but it's happened and it's like okay, so there's kind of like uh, people put these qualifiers in their mind of like, oh, is your sourdough sour? And I'm like, okay, that's not really quantifiable. And sometimes things like ingredients,
Mhm.
because as a cottage baker, I'm required to list out all of my ingredients, and people don't realize that things that cheddar cheese is not an ingredient. It's got a bunch of sub-ingredients. So I'm required to list all of those out, so I've had things like people coming up and like, "Why does your stuff have so many ingredients in it?" And I'm like, "Bro, it's flour, salt, water, like,
Yeah.
that's it." But I have to list all of those sub-ingredients, and they kinda get sometimes people get really upset by that, and they don't understand what you mean. So,
Yeah.
it can get kind of frustrating, you just have to kinda be patient and explain, like, "I am required by law to post these
Mhm.
things, and, these things have sub-ingredients," and you just try to be as patient as you possibly can, and just sometimes, though, you also have to nod and smile.
Mhm.
I've learned that the hard way. I learned that from my time in retail. Sometimes you just have to let somebody have their misconception and you
Mhm.
don't have to get the last word and you don't have to be right. And for me, it's just as long as I know I'm presenting my brand and I know
Mhm.
my product and I'm presenting it in a way that I'm happy with, if they want to buy it, they can buy it. And if it's not jiving with them, then they can keep walking. I'm not
Yeah.
it is what it is.
Yeah. No, that's incredibly valid. I've had the same experience when working the booth for Carrie.
Candles can be
So
divisive, I hear too.
so I'm not great at the tent. My personality is suited for this desk and these monitors, and that's about
I mean, that's kind of how I felt before I started the business. It was one of my hesitations with
yeah.
doing farmers markets because I didn't love working retail. And I've been accused of many things over the years, one of them being that I'm not the most warm person in the world.
I think it genuinely it depends too when you're doing something that you are more passionate about and something that you love, like retail. We're not we're not involved in that. That's not our it's not our company. I could be
Right.
here for a short
Right. I don't care if you
with
buy these shoes.
exactly. I'm not when I worked in restaurants, like, "I'm so sorry, I don't care if you order this or not. This is not a restaurant." But when it's, your bread, your pride, your tent, or Carrie's candles, Carrie's tent, Carrie's pride, those are different things. And I think we also have such a good market community of vendors that are so, like,
Absolutely.
strongly supportive of everyone that it's so easy to feel more pride in your business and in what you're doing. And I Just love that for you guys. You won.
We really do. I was so shocked when I kind of got into the community because I was extremely nervous about starting to do markets and like, am I gonna make friends with anybody? Am I gonna meet
Yeah.
anyone? Am I just gonna be standing here by myself in 95-degree heat trying to sell bread? Like, or as Chelsea from Tumbezi and Friends says, I'm gonna, put you guys in parking lots, in the
Yeah.
heat, while you sell things, you know. But the community here is absolutely incredible, both on the vendor side, but also on the customer side. Like, I have met some of the nicest customers over my 2 years of doing this, and, like, some people that, like, came to my very first market that will still pop their head in at, like, a random market
Yeah.
and be like, "Hey, I'm glad you're still around," and it's like,
Oh,
this is just amazing, and especially as someone
yeah.
who I kind of grew up with the concept, and I think a lot of women have this, that, like, women we're taught that women are catty and
Mhm.
non-supportive, and we
Mhm.
fight and we're, whatever, and I kind of grew up with that sort of mindset, and it's not the case at all. Like, once you actually get into it and you meet some of these people, where it's so supportive and
Mhm.
wonderful.
It really is, and, like, even over here as, like, the behind the scenes type of person, everybody is so incredibly supportive, and everybody's just so stupidly nice, like, I just love it. It's just so kind, and it's a refreshing? It's a refreshing part of owning a business, and I think also in this time and, we all have our separate things, like, Carrie's in our candle lab every day. You are doing your full-time job and baking, and so we are, still sitting here alone and doing these things, but we have people in our back pocket that we can reach out to and people who understand, and so that support network is so, so big. And I know
Yeah.
I talked about that in the very first episode that we ever did, that even if everybody else around you is not supporting the idea of you going into business, you have to support you, and then you find people who support you.
Yes, it's kind of like this hamster wheel where, like, you
Yes.
kind of get into it, you're like, I can do this," and then you start getting people in your corner that are, like, shouting at you, "You can do this, you can do this, you can do
Yeah.
this," and maybe eventually you start believing it too, and now you're like, "Oh, wow," like, it's just this cycle of kind of support, and it's really wonderful. I was not expecting to find that when I started the business, and even once I started meeting some other vendors and kind of
Mhm.
cautiously, like, talking to them and, like, getting to know them a little bit better, you're still kind of hesitant to, like, do I ask them for advice? Do I look like I'm weak? Do I look like I don't know how to handle this situation?
Yeah.
Because I'm in business. I'm supposed to know all of these things. And instead,
No.
like, just yesterday, like, I had a situation and I, like, ran it by another business owner. I was like, "Hey, sanity check me. Does this sound fair? Does this sound right?" And she was like, "No, I think you're good." And I
Yeah.
just was like, "Cool, thank you." Like, a 5-minute conversation, just wanna make sure that, like, I'm not, stepping out of bounds here, you know?
Yeah. No, it's so important, just, like, especially with these COVID businesses and being self-employed, like, we got stuck kind of relying on ourselves and our own brain, and it's really hard to do everything by yourself, but we try anyway, and then, we just cry in front of our oven, so
With birth scones, yeah.
yeah, with burnt scones, so or we sit at our desks and cry so forever. It is what it is, though, but pivoting real quick, because this is an accounting podcast. You are the only interview that I've had who we don't actually do monthly bookkeeping or anything.
Ah, okay. Yeah,
Yeah, you're in this unique position. So I get to kind of ask you the actual questions that I have about bookkeeping and how it relates to this podcast. So
sweet.
rapid fire. No, I'm just kidding. I know earlier you had said that, you cut things depending on the efficiency level of the baking process and things like that. But when, I've talked to other people in the past, we do have to cut programs or we have to cut inventory items or things that are just not as profitable as they may be or as we would like them to be. So how have you handled, tracking the profit per flavor of biscuit or what's popular and things like that, just to make sure that you are staying with what's profitable and you're not expending energy on things that are not actually working for you?
It's a mixture of, so one element of my business that might be different for other kinds, I mean, I think it depends on what you sell. Material costs for me are probably my biggest expense because all of
Yes.
not only are they materials, but they're also perishable.
Right.
So they only last for so long and then they get eaten and they're gone. So I keep I have this crazy kind of brain tracker for like how much materials are costing, and sometimes things will take a jump, and I have to go, okay, is that still? Can I one keep selling it at the price I'm currently selling it at? Can it sustain a price increase and me not feel terrible about doing that to my customers? And 3, is there maybe an alternative brand or an alternative way I can get this, or can I buy it in a larger bulk quantity that pulls the cost down per ounce or whatever? And then also it's listening to customer feedback too. Like I'll message people sometimes and say like, "Hey, that new flavor of biscuit that I put out, how are you feeling about it?" "Oh, I really like these." Okay, okay, mental note that people seem to be liking these. You watch what sells at a market, which that's complicated because
Yeah.
I have figured out in the last even just like the last 6 months, there is no consistency to any of that, and the second I thought I had that figured out, it doesn't match with reality sometimes, and sometimes it's literally just what people are in the mood for that day. You can't
Yeah.
even go based on like, well, at this location, this flavor of sourdough tends to do better because then the next time I would go there and it was the complete opposite. This other flavor
Yeah.
I didn't bring that time, everybody was asking for it.
Of
So
course. Yeah.
it's kind of it's a little bit like you can try to control it to a certain point, but it's also
Mhm.
kind of uncontrollable at times.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I put a lot of importance on my pricing, and I really don't like doing price increases, so I find it like I try to buy the same brands of things and the same pricing and the same quantity so that I know that I'm still able to offer that product at that price.
I think your prices are really, really reasonable for the level of homemade baked good that I
That's good to
do.
hear because that's an awkward question to ask people, you know? It's sometimes every once in a while someone's like, "Oh, is that it?" when they go to check out, and then other times you can see people kinda peering at the price tag, and you're like, "I can't tell if you can't read the price tag or if you're
Or do
scoffing
you
at
is
it
it
or"
yeah, are you in shock or are you just
Right,
can read?
right.
Yeah.
But I mean,
No.
that's kinda the whole thing with small business too and shopping
Mhm.
local and local math as they call it and
Local
all of
market,
that
yeah.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
if someone wants to support local, a lot of times they won't mind how it costs, but I still have to go home at the end of the day and feel good about what I
Right.
brought.
Did you I know you said that you have done a price increase in the past. Do you have, like, a percentage that you try to keep the markup at? Like, we don't have to go into what it is, but just, like, a way that you figured out how to do your pricing that works best for you, and, like, did you kinda develop it, or did you find, like, a calculator online, or how did you kinda come up with
It's kind of a mix, so generally with bakeries, you do material costs times 3,
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
there's like a 30% markup on top of that. That's generally what you aim for. I I've always tried to keep things also you have to look at your local market as well and
Mhm.
kind of figure out, like, what are other people charging for similar items? And I'm not saying that you have to charge the same as or less than your competitors. Like, you need to charge what you need to charge to pay your bills.
Right.
But you
Know
do,
your worth.
especially with food. Yes, exactly, exactly. But I do feel like with food in particular, you do kinda have to watch your local market and see
Mhm.
where you're at and kinda keep that in mind. So, yeah, I kinda factor all those things down. Like, a few months back, my bread flour went through the roof, and my husband went to go restock, and he called me, and he was like, "Wendy, it's gone up $16 a bag since the last time
That's
I bought it."
ridiculous.
Yeah, and I kinda was like and until that point, I hadn't really increased my sourdough prices, but I had to put a temporary price
Yeah.
increase on, and I was, super apologetic about it, and thankfully, when we restocked a couple weeks ago, the price had gone back down to normal again. It's the
Mhm.
happiest I've ever been to, like, reduce those prices back down again. Because to me, it was just that threshold that I was at that I was like, "I'm not comfortable going beyond this."
Do you find with your price increases, especially since you're not as comfortable doing them, that transparency with everybody is the best to like do a full blown announcement that your prices do have to go up? Or do you think that if you didn't necessarily make an announcement, do you think people would still be okay with price increases?
I have always done an announcement anytime I've had to increase prices. I don't know if people appreciate that based on the feedback I often get, which is usually people are very supportive. I mean, let's be real, like and again with my business being a food business, everyone's going to the grocery store. Everyone knows that the
Mhm.
cost of stuff is going up. I mean, and that's also another reason I'm conscious about raising my prices is because I know everyone's paying more to buy their groceries to start with. So trying to be mindful of that, but for the most part, people are supportive. I don't know, I mean, maybe some people have stopped ordering from me because of a price increase, but no one has ever directly said to me like, "Oh, this
The
is this
prices.
is too much.
Yeah.
You're price gouging," or
Yeah.
whatever. I've
Yeah.
been lucky on that front.
We would just have to fight at that point.
Like, I'll take it instead, it's fine.
Yeah. I'll just take those biscuits instead. Thanks. I know when you guys moved and you got your new house that you created like a little commercial kitchen area for you specifically. Was there a kind of a financial review that you did in order to make that kind of big decision? I know that's obviously something that you wanted in order to have better production, but was there any sort of like financial review on that financial decision making that we had to do in order to do such a thing? And with that, I mean like looking at the business finances specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. That was I mean, my husband and I had been talking about moving for a number of years, but the business is ultimately what really pushed that decision, and it
Mhm.
kind of forced our hand in some ways, so we had to have a lot of discussions about, expectations for the new house, even just looking at the space, whether it would work,
Yeah.
and then, okay, well, how much are we wanting to spend in the first month? How much are we
Mhm.
wanting to spend in 6 months? What does a year down the road look like? And I am extremely risk adverse
Mhm.
to a fault,
Same.
and that is
Same girl.
something I will fully yeah, I will fully admit to it. I will sit in a safe space as long as I possibly can before making a
Yeah.
decision. And so, yeah, we had to have many, many discussions like, I mean, for example, I think you know about this, like, we made the decision to move our oven from our prior space into the new one, and that was going to become my
Mhm.
business oven. So the business, quote, unquote, "paid us" for that
Mhm.
oven, and then it died. Like, we paid all this money to have an electrician come out and wire it, and then it died. And I was going, "Seriously?" So that's one of those perfect examples where you can't plan for everything, and that's like D-Day scenario with me and my risk adverseness,
Yeah.
with like, I had this all planned out, we were good, I was comfortable with this decision, and I am not comfortable with buying a new oven.
Yeah.
Um, but, I had to keep reminding myself that, the business I've been working extremely hard for the last, yeah, at that point, year and a half to build
Mhm.
up the business, and it can afford it. It can afford
Yeah.
this. This is exactly why we have business expenses and why this is theirs for these situations.
Right. And why we plan for the
Yes.
worst and hope for the best. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. That was unfortunate. I do remember that.
When my husband called me, it was just I was at work, and he was like, "Hey, so the electrician just came, and the outlet works." And I was like, "Oh, awesome, cool! Like, I have a market coming up, so that's great." And he's like, "Yeah, the oven does not work." Unfortunately. It was one of those things where I just had to laugh to myself because honestly too, moving is
Mhm.
so incredibly
So
stressful
stressful.
anyway. And as so many things had gone wrong, and I was like, "You know what? It's fine. It's all fine." If the
Everything's
fires
fine.
around you and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. So since you are doing your own bookkeeping, which we love, we are big DIY bookkeeper squares around here. Do you have a process that you generally stick to when you're doing your bookkeeping? Do you have a timeline? If you are listening, you don't already know, I do love a DIY bookkeeper if we stay on top of things. But if we don't stay on top of things, it gets very overwhelming. We run into cleanups and then we run into big price tags. So I know that you're very process driven and I'm sure your books are absolutely beautiful. I've never seen them, but I trust that.
I I was gonna say, you're about to do my year end, so maybe reserve that judgment until you see what I've been doing, and then you go, "Oh, hold on, Wendy." Like, about that organization that you
Important
think you
later.
have.
But we are keeping track of things and we know what especially with the oven, like, we're keeping track of what we're spending on product, we're keeping track of what we're bringing in. What does your process kind of look like on a let's go a week by week, I guess?
Yeah, so essentially I think a lot of people use spreadsheets, I keep track
Mhm,
of any money coming in, I detail, the date, the amount, what it came from, and then I calculate
mhm,
my sales tax for every
mhm.
single segment. And then I make a note to myself. I have to pay quarterly sales taxes, so I have deadlines on my calendar like a week in advance, like, hey, you have to pay this next week. And then I have a second reminder 2 days beforehand, hey, you absolutely have to do this right now. If I get
I
to that
love
second
that.
reminder, I get mad at myself because to me that means that I've, like, not kept on top of things. But yeah, and I
Yeah.
sit down every single week and I go through my credit card statements. So I utilize I'm lucky that both of my business cards use buckets, like they use those tags that you can put
Mhm.
expenses into. And
Yes.
so I think I had talked to you last year about like what expenses should I be categorizing and I made tags for all of those and I just make sure that once a week I sit down and go through all the expenses from that week and I put everything into buckets and I just make sure at the most I try not to go more than 2 weeks on that.
That is
Um
so perfect. I love that so
yeah.
much.
Well, and also I feel like for me, 'cause I do it at the same time as my personal finances, which helps a
Mhm.
lot too. Like, I sit down and do personal, I close everything out, and then I go, "Okay, business time." And then I sit down and go through all of that as well. And I feel like just it's for me and my lifestyle, it's just all about structure. It's just making sure that I literally have a standing appointment on the calendar to spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes on doing this every week.
Yeah. And that I feel like I've been preaching that for a really long time. That, that standing appointment with yourself, like and, you have to make it enjoyable. Like, I don't wanna go through my stuff either, but I do
No,
it ev
no one does.
no one does, but I do it every Friday morning, and I sit here with my cup of coffee, and I put Gilmore Girls on, and we sit and we we do our finances, and that's it. Like, it's enjoyable, though. It's a good thing. Like, if you sit here and you go, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna crack open a beer because this is so stressful and I don't wanna do this," then it's not fun. It's not enjoyable. We don't wanna do that.
No, and I mean, I think people sometimes also let things spiral out of control. I mean, I
Yes.
know I've definitely been guilty of that in my life, and then the longer you go, the more you know you're gonna have to do, the more you know that it's wrong or you've forgotten why you bought this thing at
Mhm.
Costco, and you don't remember whether it was a material expense or a I don't know, whatever other kind of expense, whether it was gas or travel expense or, whatever.
Yeah.
But keeping on top of it really, really helps. It's not so scary week to week, and even if I do
No.
skip a week, it's still like, "Okay, this is still 2 weeks, this is, manageable," or whatever. You have to get into some kind of rhythm that works for you, and, maybe for some people, if they really can't manage it, maybe they're considerably busier than I am or, you know, maybe investing in a bookkeeper is the way to go. That's it's yes, you're spending money on it, but the return on your own mental health is probably
Mhm.
worth more than anything, you know?
Probably the best ad I've ever gotten in my life.
No, the last year for me has been a whole lot of, "You know what? I'm 36, I work very hard, I can pay someone to do that.
Yeah.
I do not need to do that myself." I was very much a constant everything myself person for a
Yeah.
long time, and yeah, I mean, I had a maid in my house an hour ago, so
Oh, I love that for you. I love that so much. I miss my cleaning girl so much.
Well, especially running a food business, like, the
Yeah.
amount like, flour gets all over
Everywhere.
everything if you didn't know, and so it's just one of those things that you can do, and you're like, "I have the money for this, there's no reason that I can't
Yeah.
outsource some
Yeah.
of this and not stress myself to death about it." So, bookkeeping's no
Yes.
different. If you really find it hard to keep up with your deadlines and you're paying late fees and you're paying all of these other
Mhm.
things, the bookkeeper's probably cheaper than late fees.
Generally, I try to be.
I mean,
Yeah. No,
credit card interest
so
fees and all that stuff, yeah.
yes. Yeah. No, we don't want any of that. No, that's a very good point, and that is part of the balance that, like, we talked about in the beginning. If in order for you to maintain a lower amount of stress, you have to give things up. You cannot do everything. We just it's physically impossible. We just can't,
Yeah.
and I don't wanna do everything either, so I think those are very valid points. So, on wrapping this up, I have one last question for you, and we do this with everybody. If you were to sit in front of somebody right now who is thinking about opening a business, no matter what kind of business it is, and you could give them one piece of advice on how to get going or how to get over some sort of fear, what would you tell them?
So, I think I would tell them to figure out what image they want to project to a customer. What
Mhm,
does shopping with them look like? What does using their services look like to a customer? You know, what do you want what you do to say to someone? Because I think that a lot of people get tied up in well, I can do this to supplement my income. I can do this to have more time with my kids. I can, whatever the many reasons people go into business. But I think sometimes that message gets lost a little bit. Like, what purpose are you serving within the market? And I think that once you sit down and you find that, customers it will come back in customers to you
Yeah.
because having a clear vision, having a clear brand, having whatever that might look like is really, really important for a customer to know who you are and why they should be using you for a service or why they should be buying bread from you. It goes a lot further than just like, yeah, let me just stand here in a parking lot sweating selling bread. Like,
Yes. That's actually really good advice. I've never had anybody touch on kind of figuring out like who you are and why you want to do this first before just going and doing it. So that was great. Thank you for that.
yeah, I mean, that's just again the experience with like kind of it goes in I guess it goes into some mental health aspects, like
Yeah.
finding yourself and finding your voice. It's a common
Yeah.
marketing tool is like what is your voice, but I think it can go a lot deeper than just what are you saying in the social media post. I think people take it at face value and really I think it goes a lot deeper than that. It's who you are and what you're presenting to someone.
Yeah. Especially when we're so small, our businesses are literally an extension of ourselves. Um,
Yes,
and if you're trying to do something with your business that you're not in reality, you're going to get burned out really, really quickly. Um,
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really great. Thank you for that. All right. Well, this was actually a really great episode. Thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you for having
I
me.
I thank you for being here. If you guys are not already, you should be following Wendy on Instagram. We will link her profile in the show notes and obviously tag her everywhere. If you liked this episode, please screenshot it, tag me in your stories, tag Wendy in your stories. Give us all your feedback, unless it's mean, and then I don't want it. So
We can take that retail experience elsewhere.
yes, please. But thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another guest, and I will see you guys later.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and follow Tatum Accounting on Instagram. You can also do us a huge favor by leaving a review. It's the best way to support us. Let's catch up next week, same time, same place.